thank you so much for coming, and I'm happy you're here. And Hilda used to love small crowds because she said that rather than worrying about how many people are there, it was just the one person that God wanted to be there. So I'm sure that's one of you or all of you. It's nice, I see an old familiar face in the crowd who was also one of Hilda's students, which is really nice. Hi. And so let's just sort of unify the room first, and let's just do an Om, classic Om. Take a breath. I should probably put my glasses on so I can see all of you. That's much better. Jenny, you look so pretty in pink. Let's see. I wanted to say, first of all, if you don't know who Nityananda was Hilda's teacher and was a great yogi beyond being a yogi. There's a picture of him on the wall around the corner here. And today is actually the 62nd anniversary of his Mahasamadhi. He passed in 1961 while Hilda was still there in India. And he passed at 10:40 in the morning. And oddly enough, Hilda passed at 10:40 in the morning, which I just found that out recently and thought that was really kind of amazing. Hilda was born in 1918. Which is certainly a time in history when women doing anything was challenging. And so she set out early on, being born that early, by taking on the world as a woman. She was born in England, in London, on Seven Sisters Road in 1918. Her parents had 3 children. She had 2 brothers. They left England for America and for a better life, and they moved to Salt Lake City, of all places. She went to elementary school in Salt Lake City, and one day her teacher asked her, "What is your religion?" And she didn't know that word because her parents were agnostics and proud to be agnostic and were practicing agnostics. Her father didn't do very well when he would hear godly terms. He just didn't know what any of that was. And so she went home. The teacher sent her home to ask her parents what her religion was. And her father said, "Go back and tell the teacher that your religion is to do good." So that was her religion. As a young child, and I'm talking 4 or 5 years old, Hilda had a very active inner life, in her dream life. And she would go on throughout her life, but in those early years as a child, she would meet people like Saint Teresa and Joan of Arc and Hindu saints that she didn't even know who they were. There was one in particular who was a rather large, bald, naked man who just wore a little piece of cotton. And he would come to her in dreams, but he wouldn't speak to her. He would just come and go, "Ooh." And she didn't know what that meant. And for years, up until the time she went to India, he would appear to her and always make that gesture and that grunt. And she didn't know his name, and she knew nothing about him. She would go into the forest. Her family left Utah and moved to Los Angeles and to Oakland. And so she would go into the forest as a young girl and meditate. Well, let me go back just a little bit. When she was still living with her parents, and she was probably about 8 or 9 years old, maybe 10 years old, her parents had rooms for rent in their home. They had a big boarding house. They had a tobacco store in London. And one day the doorbell rang, and Hilda ran to get the door and opened the door, and there stood this yogi in Indian clothes, and he had just gotten off the boat, and she fainted. And so when she came to, her mother was talking with the man, and she said, "Oh, please excuse my daughter. She's just a strange child." And he said, "Your daughter is not a strange child. Your daughter's a great soul, and she needs training, and I will train her." So he became her first teacher. Her mother would come along in the hallway, and the teacher had put a nail in the wall at eyesight. So he would say, "Now you stare at this nail head. And if your mind wanders and you think, oh, I'm going to get a cookie in the kitchen," you say, "No." And bring your mind back and your attention back to the nail head. And then your mind would run off, "Oh, I'm going to go outside for a walk." No. And by doing this, and he was extremely disciplined and very demanding. By doing this, he taught her concentration, the ability to use her mind and focus on things to help bring about whatever it was. So that stayed with her for her whole life. He taught her to meditate and put her in a lotus position and forced her legs into this position, and it was very painful. And she would sit there, and he would say, "Don't move." And she would sit there, and she would think, "Oh, it's pain, I'm in such pain," but got to do what the master says, and she would do it. Well, she found out later that a lot of the things that he taught, that he was telling her to do, that he didn't practice himself. So from her perspective, she began to refer to him as the bogey yogi. But nonetheless, she said, even though he didn't do any of the things that he taught me, I did everything he taught me. Now, Hilda became a dancer. She was dancing around the house. She'd read every book in their library. She was always looking for new things. Her mother, who was very open, but who was also an agnostic, had met different people, and they were very, she and the father and mother were very social. They would go out a lot. And so the mother had made a lot of friends, and she would meet people, and they would give her books to read. Well, one day Hilda saw this book, and she didn't know how it had gotten there, and it was an esoteric, metaphysical book about spirituality. Now, in the middle of all of this, just as Joan of Arc and St. Teresa and St. Francis and these Christian saints had come to her, and then these Hindu yogis began to appear to her in her inner life, she began to develop a relationship with the Brotherhood of the Great White Lodge, or the Masters, as they've been referred to by Blavatsky. They've been written about. You can, as just downstairs today in the library, they have a copy of The Masters of the Path by Charles Ledbetter, who was one of the Theosophists, and it's a great book. And I'm mentioning it because it played a really important part in my life of how I met Hilda. So the masters took her on and began to guide her. Master Hilarion, Master Count Saint Germain, Master Dwal Kul, Master El Moye. And according to Blavatsky, who documented this and had a relationship with the masters herself, there are photographs of these men who were actually real men, and they lived in the Himalayas. And they, according to Blavatsky, they appeared to her off and on. They would, when she would lose track of her direction as a teacher, the masters would show up and reconnect her. But Hilda had a connection to the masters really early on, and they guided her, and they gave her directions. And meanwhile, everybody else around her was kind of like, her friends would make fun of her. Oh, Hilda Yogi, the Yogi Hilda. But she was a dancer, and she would go into the forest and she would sit and meditate. And she would hear these sounds, these chants, and she would listen to them and remember them. And then she would make dances to go with them. And then she would perform them for people. And people would be amazed because here was this young girl doing these incredible dances and these incredible sounds that no one had ever heard before. And so as she went along, she ended up having a dance studio, and she had a group of young women and a couple of men who became her dancers. And she would create dances. And one of the dances that she created was called the dance of Angkor Wat, which of course is from Indonesia, where she had never been. Cambodia, yes. And so she, and feel free to jump in at any time because you were with Hilda longer than I was. And I was with Hilda for 10 years. At any rate, she would see these in her mind. She would see the costumes and she'd create the costumes. And the masters would appear to her and say, well, go to the hardware store and get a funnel, that you would pour something into it, get a funnel and spray paint that. And she'd make that as the headdress. And then she'd create the whole costume. And she'd already heard the music and created the dance. So it all came from inside of her. And at one performance, Margaret Mead, the great anthropologist from that time period, was in the audience and came back to see her afterwards and said, I just come from South America. How do you know these chants? These are ancient Incan Mayan chants. And these dances, these are Inca, these are Mayan and Incan. And she said, well, I heard them. So she had her dance company for a long time in Oakland. And at one point she had 2 different studios. And one studio, she was making money with her students, and the other one wasn't doing so well. So she had a conversation with God, and she said, I'll tell you what, this one's not doing so well, so I'll give you all the money from that one. How generous. Well, what happened was God made that one so successful that she had to close the other one that she was living off of. So suddenly she had no money. She was giving all of her money to the church or to homeless people. And that was when I think she began to learn her lesson that whatever deal you make with God, he will hold you to it. It must have been very difficult for her to grow up in an agnostic family, where her father, and especially her older brother, Peter, was angry with her all the time. They thought she was crazy. They thought, oh, poor sister, she believes all this nonsense. And it affected her relationship with her older brother for many, many years, to the point of, up until the very end of his life, she didn't think they were ever going to reconnect. And she prayed for him, and she prayed for him. And then one day out of the blue, her mother called her and said, your brother Peter wants you to come to dinner. And, I said I'd invite you, but I don't want an argument. And she said, oh no, Mother, that's what I've been longing for. So she came and made up with her brother. And her brother said, I may not understand you, but I think you're the real deal. So after and while she had the dance company, she also had to make money. She had to eat. And so her friend, who was another dancer in the company, worked at a factory at the time. And he said to her, they're hiring typists at the factory. Oh, I'll go in and apply for the job. So she went in to apply for the job, and there were a pool of typists, like 25 of these women. And their job was to take these index cards that had all the information about every employee in the company and transfer them to a new setup that they were doing. So she had to type them. Well, Hilda didn't know how to type. She'd never used a typewriter. So she said to one of the secretaries, do you know how to type? And she said, yeah. She says, well, can you show me? She said, yeah, I guess. You know, you memorize all the letters and, you know, just build up a rhythm. Hilda was like, oh, I can do that. I'm a dancer, of course. So I would be typing with a rhythm, and I was so proud of myself. I was getting 5 cards a day done. And then the manager came through one day to check on the progress of this project. And he said to Hilda, you know, Miss Charlton, how are you doing? Oh, it's just great. I'm just loving this. You know, every person's name I see on this card, I send them good vibes. I pray for them. He said, oh, well, that's really nice. We just, you know, want you to get the job done. How many cards are you doing a day? And she said, oh, 5. And he said, oh, well, you know, the other girls are doing 25 a day. And she said, yes, but every one of mine is perfect. And so, and then she heard, so that didn't last long. And then she heard through the other people that worked there that they needed a operator, telephone operator, to operate the phone board, to connect the calls, and also to make announcements to the yard where all the employees were. So let's say Pete Smith was an employee, and the boss would come and say, Miss Charlton, would you have Pete Smith come to my office? So she had heard the other person who'd had the job do it, and it was like, oh, Pete Johnson, come to the office, you know, and really sort of brash. And Hilda thought, well, that's a terrible way to speak to someone. So then when the lady quit the job, and then Hilda got the job, so then Hilda would get on and say, would the wonderful Mr. Peter Smith please just kindly make your way to the office? Thank you so very much. And all of the people that worked there would laugh, and they'd say, they knew she was a dancer, and it was the 30s, so they'd say, oh, that hoochie dancer's on the microphone again, and they would make fun of her. So she had a few jobs, and she had her dance company. She decided that she wanted to do, her dances were all spiritual dances. The dance of Mary, the dance of St. Francis, the Angkor Wat dance. They were all spiritual dances. The music that she heard, that she helped create for all of these pieces, her perspective was that if she danced these pieces and the audience saw her dance and heard her, that would affect them, that it would bless them, that they would be enlightened by this experience. And for the most part, it did. And people loved her. Well, she somehow ended up back in Los Angeles and was living with a family who were vegetarians. And she was a vegetarian, but she liked milkshakes. She loved chocolate milkshakes. Even though the masters would come to her and say, no milkshakes. Stop eating the milkshakes. And while she was there living in Los Angeles, she met through this family a woman named Princess Machiavelli. Her husband was Prince Machiavelli, who created a cosmetic and perfume line in the 1920s and 30s. And so they were quite well off and well-to-do and well seated, and they knew a lot of people in Hollywood. So they said, oh, you know, Hilda, when you dance, it's just so wonderful. We should do an evening of your dance and invite these people. And Princess Machiavelli said, well, you can do it in my garden. I have this beautiful formal garden, and there'll be these beautiful satin sofas, and there'll be candles, and oh, it'll be wonderful. And Hilda said, oh, this will be great. So she had this dance that she did, where she would start off with a black robe and a black hood, and it was very heavy staccato type of movements. And then she had this platform built that went up, and as she was performing, she would back up as she went up in the air to the top of the platform, she would, at the crescendo, she would throw off the robe, and there she would be in a white gown, and it was a symbolic gesture of the darkness of our lives, the humanity falling away while the spiritual nature comes forth. Well, she said, I'm backstage, I'm behind this display, I'm looking around and I'm watching the audience. Oh my goodness, there's Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford and, all of these Hollywood celebrities. And she's thinking, oh, this is great, I'm going to get discovered, And so she went out, she started the dance. She's doing the whole thing. She's going up, she's going up. She's ready for that last step behind her. And she went to throw off, and there was no step. And she fell into the lily pond. And she came up out of the lily pond drenched, and the entire place was laughing. And she heard the master say to her, "You had big plans, did you? I have bigger plans for you." Yogananda was there at that performance, and he came back to see her. And he said, "Do you know that when you dance, light comes out of your hands and feet, and it goes on to the people in the audience, and it changes them and it blesses them?" She said, "Oh yeah, I know. You can see that?" He said, "Yes, I can see that." He said, "You should come with me. You're not going to make it in Hollywood. That was obvious. Now they're laughing at you. So come with me. I want you. Come with me and study with me. Travel with me." He had just started his fellowship there in Los Angeles. She was like, "Oh, wow, the great Yogananda wants me. This is great." So she ran home to pack. And when she got home and started packing, she sat down so she could have a prayer of gratitude. And the masters came through and said, "No, that's not your path." So she called Yogananda and said, "I'm really sorry, but God has other plans for me." So she decided it was time to go to India. She had no money. She had a dance company. They had all these choreographed, wonderful program to present. And she said to her dancers, "We're going to go to India. We're going to take this to India, where it's a land of spirituality and openness, and they'll love us. It'll be great." And they said, "We don't have any money, Hilda. Where will you get money from?" And she said, "Oh, we'll get money." And he said, "Where will you get money from?" She said, she thought about it for a minute. She said, Ingrid Bergman, let's call Ingrid Bergman, and she'll come, and that'll publicize the event, and we'll sell tickets." And they said, "Hilda, you don't know Ingrid Bergman?" And she said, "Well, it doesn't matter. God knows her." So she sat down and wrote a letter to Ingrid Bergman. When Ingrid Bergman's manager got the letter, he laughed and said, "Look, some girl in San Francisco, in Oakland, has written you a letter like you have nothing better to do." And she said, "Give me the letter." And she read the letter and she said, "Book the date, I'll go." So Ingrid Bergman came, and they sold all the tickets, and they made all this money, and they bought tickets not on a big cruise line, but on a shipping vessel with all of these rough men, and they were sleeping in sleeping bags, on the deck. And then finally the men created rooms for them. And then slowly she began to win them all over. And by the time they got to India, which at that time probably took several months to get to India from California on a boat. And when they finally got there, by that time, the captain of the ship had completely fallen in love with her and her work, and had been changed by the entire experience. So she arrives in India in 1947, and they immediately set out to figure out where could they perform, where could they do her dances. And they performed at some churches and some different places, but the women in the group were kind of like, "This is not very good. They don't treat women very well here, and we're going home." So she said, "Okay." So she saw them to the boat and said, "Tell my parents that I've come home." And she stayed in India. And from that point on, she just began to travel around India. And she would look for ashrams where you would see a flag flying that it was an ashram or the residence of a yogi or a holy person. And she would go and she would just take a handkerchief out of her pocket and just start cleaning. And they would come, give her food, say, "You can sleep over there." And that's how she would survive. Also, she would ride the trains, and she would say, I would sleep in the luggage cart, the luggage racks. She said I was much thinner in those days. I could fit in the luggage racks. And also, all of this time, she's practicing. She's practicing yoga. She's practicing meditation. She's practicing concentration. She's doing the work that the masters are teaching her in her dreams. Every night, she's taken somewhere in a dream to the Himalayas, to some place where there's some master, a yogi, and she's having this whole inner life of being trained. And as that was happening, her kundalini began to rise. And as her kundalini began to rise, she developed, all the Shakti started to come into her, and she was hot. She was just hot all the time. She couldn't get cool. And she spent an awful lot of time traveling and trying to figure out what to do. So one day she was on the train. She said, I just couldn't stand it any longer. I just had to get off the train. So I said to the conductor, I need to get off this train. And she said, well, we don't stop here. The train won't stop for another 10 or 20 miles up the road. She said, no, I have to get off the train now. And he said, well, I can't do that. She said, well, if you don't stop the train and let me off, I'm jumping off the train, I'll probably get killed, and it'll be your karma, which he understood. So they stopped the train and they let her off. She got off in the middle of nowhere, and she began to walk in this rhythm, in this fever, walking and walking, not knowing where she was going. And suddenly she sees a group of people, and they're carrying a statue of Lord Ganesha. And she said, I'll get in with them. So she got in with them, and she didn't know where they were going, but she went with them. And they came to a clearing. And in the clearing, there was a big banyan tree, and people sitting around the tree. And up in the tree was Nityananda. And she saw him, and she fainted. And he came down out of the tree. When she woke up, he was standing there, and he looked at her, and he went, ooh. And she followed him back to his residence, and she stayed with him until he took Mahasamadhi. Of course, the day that he took Mahasamadhi, a few days before, he had given her a task, and that was, there was an English couple who had come, and they were on a tour, a spiritual tour, and they wanted to meet all the yogis at that time, and they wanted to meet Krishnamurti. So, and Hilda wanted to meet Krishnamurti, and she had read about him, and she had read things by him, and she really wanted to meet him, and she'd never gotten to meet him. So Nityananda said, and she had this little jalopy, this little car. Some guy had it flown there from England and was using it, and then he was leaving, and she happened to be standing there, and he said, you want a car? And he gave her this little jalopy. So she drove so he said, would you take this couple to see Krishnamurti, where he lives? And it was quite a trip. It was she had to drive there, and they had to stay overnight going there and coming back. So when she got there with this couple, now Krishnamurti's residence had a long driveway that went into a circle drive. And on the other side of the circle was the entrance to the house. So when they pulled up, someone came out and greeted them and said, the master will see you. So the English couple got out, and Hilda got out. She's not going to be Krishnamurti. And he said, not you, just this couple. She's like, oh. So she sat in the car waiting. And after a while, they came out. And then the man said, the master will see you now. So she went in, and she said, in that short distance from the car to the room that they led me into, 1,000,000 questions went through my mind. I want to ask him about this, and I want to ask him about that. He'll know all about this, and he can hit me to this. And she was so excited. She got in the room. Krishnamurti walked in, and she said, I stood up, and he said, hello, daughter, and what can I do for you? And she went, and nothing would come out of her mouth. And he began, and he smiled, and he said, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. And and he said, you don't really have anything to ask me? And he literally was teasing her and making fun of her. So he said, well, my time is up, you can go now. So he walked her out, and the couple were in the back seat of the car, and she got in the car and thinking, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. I thought I was going to I met him, but maybe I wasn't specific enough when I said to God, I want to meet Krishnamurti. I should have said, I want to meet Krishnamurti, and actually, can we talk with him? Well, he stood on the veranda as she started the car, and she started around the circle. When she got this side of the circle, the car took over and just kept going in the circle. And she took her hands off the wheel, and the car just kept going around the circle. And every time it would go past Krishnamurti, he would wave and laugh at her. And then finally drove off, and that was that. She took the people back to their hotel. She returned to the ashram, and the flag was at half-mast, and Nityananda had left. And she came in, and she went to where his ashes were and where his Samadhi shrine was, and threw herself on the ground and said, how could you do this to me? You came to me as a child. You called me to you. I've spent my life finding you. And now after a few short years of being with you, you leave me? And then she heard him speak in her mind. He said, daughter, you think because I have dropped these garments of flesh that I'm gone? I will walk with you the rest of your journey. And then many years later, Jenny and I and a very large satsang of students would be there. And Hilda always invited kind of kooky people would show up to talk. One day this lady came from Canada, and she was a psychic. And Hilda didn't care much for the psychic thing. She said when it started opening in her, she wanted it shut down. She wanted to shut it down. It was distracting her from her love of God. Like, why would I settle for gold trinkets when I can have the gold mine? That was her perspective. Well, this woman came, and Marilyn Ferguson was her name. And she sat on the stage next to Hilda, and I was sitting right up front. I could hear their conversation, and Hilda had pushed the microphone away, and the woman said, there's a nude bald man standing behind you. She said, yeah, I know. It's, this Nityananda, And the first time I ever went to Hilda's home, in the main room, the living room, there was a chair and a sofa and a little TV on a TV stand. And this huge room, and it had pillows and little altars and little tables with candles on them and things. And I thought, well, actually, I knew I was going to have this. I waited so long to get a private interview with her, and I had written to her, and she said, yes, come on Thursday morning. Well, on Wednesday night, I had a dream. And in the dream, I was knocking on the door. The door opened, and there was a long hallway. At the end of the hallway, there was a curtain. Then you went behind the curtain, and there was this room, and the blue chair, the sofa, the TV, and then all these cushions. But in my dream, I could see St. Teresa and Joan of Arc and St. Francis and Golden Tomahawk and all of these Indian saints standing there in the dream. So when I came the next day, I had never been there, and the door, I come in, there's the hallway, there's the curtain, there's the living room. I'm sitting in the living room waiting for Hilda to come out, and I can only see what we see here. I could only see what you could see. But I started saying, I know you're here, and I know you're here, and I know you're here. And I'm sitting there, and I'm starting to sweat, and already I'm going into this wonderful state of being. And Hilda comes in and comes up behind me, and she says, do you see my beloveds? And I said, well, I can't see them now, but I saw them last night in my dream. And she said, oh, who did you see? And I said, oh, well, so-and-so. And she said, that's right. And I said, and I saw that, oh, that's right. And then I spent 10 hours with her. And it was a great talk. But I wanted to tell you how I met Hilda, because it really is the root of everything that changed my life. I lived in New York. I was a club kid. I went out to the nightclubs. I was the house photographer at Studio 54, the nightclub, published books of those pictures. And I was, you know, my parents were agnostic, like Hilda's. She once said to me, "You're just like me. You're neither male nor female." And I thought, well, that explains a lot. And so I was living this life. I had a television show, a cable show, called Fast Talk, the show for fast people who have something to say. And it was downtown on the Lower East Side. I think I weighed 80 pounds. And I had a black mohawk, and I was a punk rocker, and I had my little cable television show. And I was going to be a big success. I was going to be famous and be a TV star in my mind. And then one day, when I was about to record my show, I had a appendicitis attack. And they called the ambulance, and the ambulance took me from the Lower East Side of Rivington Street all the way to 114th in Amsterdam, bypassing every hospital in the city, like I don't know why. They took me to St. Luke's Hospital. I had emergency appendectomy. I woke up the next morning in my room. I opened the window. There was St. John the Divine. I'd never seen it. I'd never been that far north in Manhattan. I didn't even know that it existed. And then I looked over, and next to my bed on the table, there was a book. And the book was called The Nature of Reality by Master Hilarion. And I didn't know what it was, but there was nothing else to read. So I picked it up and I started reading it, and yeah, well, that makes sense. Oh yeah, as you think, you know, so shall you be, all the things that we've all learned. I was like, oh yeah, I didn't know any of this, but I knew it when I heard it. I thought, I know this, why do I know this? You know. So I took the book home with me. So I got the book home, and I really, really liked it a lot, and I was really inspired by it. So I wrote a letter to the people from Canada who had produced the book. A man named Maurice Cook, that was his pen name, was a writer and a yoga student who figured out by reading metaphysical books that during the Wesak festival on Buddha's birthday, if you sit and meditate, concentrate on your pineal gland in the center of your forehead, in the center of your head, and say you are offering yourself to service, to God, use me. And he did that a long, long time. And then the only time he could do it, because he was at work, it had to be done exactly at this hour. He would go into the men's room and he would sit in the stall and meditate and do this exercise. And then one day he heard a voice. And the voice said, "We're ready for you to serve." And he channeled 9 books from Master Hilarion. And this was the first book that I had read. So I thought all that was interesting. I wasn't sure I believed it, but I liked the books. I liked what they had to say. So I wrote them. They sent me a second book, Seasons of the Spirit. Great book. Told me things that I couldn't conceive of. I had never thought of the possibility that you could actually turn the other cheek. Not just because it says so in the Bible or some holy book tells you this, but to actually figure out how you could actually do that. And so I became very interested in this. And at the same time, I was living with my boyfriend, who was a biker and a heroin addict and covered in tattoos, who had been in prison. And I would say, oh, it says here. And he'd say, finally he said, look, it's either me or all this religious stuff. He had built a bomb when he was 14 to blow up the Catholic Church and blew off one of his fingers. So I got it. I realized that was a big issue for him. So I was like, oh, okay, whatever, fine. So I closed it. So I turned the page, and on the very next page, it says, you will reach a point on your path when those in your life will say to you, it's either me or all of this stuff. Oh, and that was enough. I closed the book and forget that, roll me a joint, let's start all over, this is all too weird. And then began a series of synchronistic experiences. I'd be walking down the street, I would think of someone, they'd turn the corner. I would be at home, the phone would ring, I'd be thinking of someone, the phone would ring, and it would be them. And I thought, oh, isn't that funny? I thought that was funny. What a coincidence. Funny. And then it stopped being a coincidence. And it sort of elevated itself to the degree that it was interfering with my life, the life I thought I was living. And at that juncture, I didn't know what to do about any of this. So I put it all away. Shortly after, I'm walking down Fifth Avenue and 13th Street, Manhattan, Lower Manhattan, and I see this bookstore, the East West Bookstore. I'd never seen it before. And I saw that it had been founded like 30 years earlier, but I'd never seen it, and I had friends who lived across the street. How could I have missed it? But I went in, I was drawn in. The titles of the books are jumping off the page at me. And I'm thinking, wow, I was just reading about that, and those Hilarion books, and oh, isn't that interesting? And then I thought, but I don't know, I went to the library, there were no computers then. I went to the library and I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find anything about Hilarion, the name Hilarion, so I decided, all right, writers write. That's what they do. They make up stories and they write. And it's a good story, but I'm not sure that any of this is real or true. So I said, that's that. And just about that moment, I turned the corner and there's a book sticking off the top shelf in this bookstore. And I thought, oh, that's gonna fall and hit somebody. So I took it and I brought it down and I didn't look at the title or anything, I just opened it somewhere in the book and it said, Master Hilarion, Master of the Fifth Ray, influencer of overseer of melodious utterance, influencer of poets, and I'm a poet. Well, I took the book, I bought the book, it was $12.99, and then there was tax, and I only had $13 in my pocket, and I went to pay for it, and the girl behind the counter said, I'm not going to charge you tax today. Bought the book, brought the book home, read the whole book, skipped the chapter on ego, because I knew I didn't have one. And then one of the things that Hilarion had suggested in his books was that if you want to communicate with the masters, keep a dream journal. Every day when you wake up, write down first thing that comes to your mind. In the beginning, it's gibberish. It means nothing. It doesn't seem like it means anything. The color purple, an elephant, And then we all do, we go to the library and get a book on dreams and try to discern what all this means, and it doesn't seem to mean anything. So I started keeping a dream journal. And after about a month of keeping a dream journal, diligently, I would keep it under my pillow. As soon as I was awake, I would write in my dream journal. I had a dream. And in the dream, I was looking at a house that was for sale. And I went into the yard and there were these other people and they were there looking at the house. And then I went in the house and was up in stairs, and the woman it was a blonde lady, and she was the real estate agent, I thought, and she's showing me the house. And as I'm looking at the walls, out of the corner of my eye, I can see this woman with the blonde hair, and she has horns. And I thought, oh my God, that woman's got horns. And then, as I turned to look at her, she completely, fully manifests into the devil. And I wasn't a person who believed in the devil, but I sure know what I was seeing in my dream. And so in the dream, I ran out of the room, and I ran down the stairs, and I ran out into the yard, and there were all those other people, and they all had horns. And I didn't know what to do. And I heard the sweetest voice say to me, come this way. And I looked, and up on the hill, there was a light, a bright light, and a silhouette of someone in a cape. I couldn't see the front, I could only see the silhouette. And so as soon as I said, oh, I'm gonna be there, I was there. And as soon as I was there and turned, I looked at her. And I looked at this woman, and she had brown hair and these amazing blue eyes. And she smiled, and then she faded away. And I woke up and I wrote the whole dream down. A week later, I'm in another dream. I'm in an old 1930s black car, and I'm driving it, and there's a storm, and there's lightning, and it's pouring, and I can't see, and the windshield wipers don't work, and the steering wheel's wobbly like it's gonna come off in my hand, and I'm sort of panic-stricken, and I hear a voice behind me in the back seat that says, "Let me drive. Do you trust me? Let me drive." And I look up in the rearview mirror, and I see this woman with brown hair and these incredible blue eyes, and I say, "Yes." And suddenly I'm in the passenger seat, and she's driving, and it's sunny and beautiful, and we drive and we talk, and I wake up and I know we talked about something really important, but I couldn't remember what it was, and that went on for a really long time. So I wrote that dream down. A week later, I had a third dream. And in that dream, I was in a stairwell. And I was in the middle of a circular stairwell, and I didn't know whether the exit was up or the exit was down. So, but it's on one hand, I thought maybe if you go down, that's the ground level and I can get out, or maybe that goes to the basement and the exit is at the top. So there were doors. So I knocked on a door, and the door opened, and there were all these very unsavory people. And I said, oh, and then I ran up the stairs. And then at the top of the stairs, I hear this beautiful voice singing these chants. And I think I should go that way. So I go up to the top of the stairs, and when I get to the top of the stairs, there's no door or anything. There's just light. And standing there in the light is this woman with brown hair and blue eyes. So then I wrote a letter to the people in Canada. And I said, all right, who are you people? I felt like Richard Dreyfuss in Close Encounters when they show him the drawing of Devil's Tower and said, does this mean anything to you? And he said, yeah, I have one just like it in my living room. Who are you people? And so I wrote a letter to them, and I put my phone number. And I got a phone call from Maurice Cook's wife. And she called me and she said, don't panic. You're so blessed. You happen to live in a city where one of the greatest living teachers on the planet lives and gives classes that are free at St. John the Divine every Thursday night. I said, oh, and I wrote it all down. Said, thank you. And it was Friday, which meant that I had to wait a whole week before I could go. Well, I lived around the corner from the Yoga Institute. So I thought, I'm gonna go take yoga, I'm gonna meditate. They probably levitate up there, and I'm gonna be like them. So I was determined. So I showed up the next Thursday in the Synod House next to St. John the Divine. Probably held about, if you filled it to capacity, it probably held 1,000 people. And it was packed. There was a raised stage at one end, and there was a little orchestra playing instruments, and there was a chair. It was like set up like this. This is for Hilda. And, but Hilda wasn't there yet. And so, and people are singing songs, and they're singing, you know, Beatles, love, love, love. And I'm thinking, this is a little corny for me. And then they started, and then all of a sudden, all the hair on the back of my neck stood up. And I turned around, and I saw Hilda in this cape with a blue sari coming down the aisle. And I thought, I know her. I must know her from Studio 54. There's you know, my references were all worldly, you know. So she comes up, and as she comes up on the stage, everyone stands and they start singing, we've just come to praise the Lord. And I thought, and I'd sat right up front because I'm so important. And I thought, oh, this is some kind of religious cult. Oh my God. And now I'm stuck here. It would be awkward to get up and walk out. You know, so I sat there. Well, I fell in love with her immediately. And she said, so familiar. And I couldn't figure out why she seemed so familiar to me. And then they started singing Hindu bhajans, devotional songs. And I was like, I know this. Why do I know this? I don't know. I know this. I didn't know I knew it, but I knew it. I knew the words. And I couldn't remember ever hearing them. So she began her talk and her lecture, and she would say things like, a lot of people, they think once they become spiritual, and they put on their yogi clothes and their mala beads and they're so holy, they don't think that, oh, you don't have an ego. I don't have an ego. She'd be talking about ego, look right at me. Now she's talking to me. Well, by the end of the class, I felt redeemed, and that now I'm in like Flint. This is the real thing. And so I couldn't get to her. She was surrounded by a lot of people. And she would do a meditation. And then after that was all over, she'd say to everyone, for those of you who want to go safely, travel safely, pay attention on the streets, make sure you're grounded, pull yourself in before you head out there. And for those of you who would like to stay for a blessing or a healing, just stay in your seat. So mostly everyone stayed in their seat. Some people left. So we're sitting there, and then they push everything off the stage, and she has someone with her walking along with the microphone, and the people line up along the right side of the stage, and she would take a few people at a time, and she would go over to one person, what is it, dear? And they would say, oh, the doctor says, I have a breast cancer, there's a lump in my breast. Okay, well, I believe in doctors, and you should do what the doctor tells you, but I believe in God more than I believe in doctors. So come on, everybody, let's ohm for them. And so 800 people would raise their hands and ohm at you. And Hilda would touch them on the chest, and then she would do something with her finger on their forehead. I said, what's that? I know what that was. And then she would touch them, and they'd fall to the ground. And I thought, oh, no. This is really weird for me. That's just weird, right? So I didn't go up. And then I came back the second week, and the third week, and the fourth week. And the fourth week, I had been telling a client of mine about this experience, about Hilda, and I described this thing where she would touch people, and this woman was a Buddhist, and she was like, I'm not sure that's even right. That sounds like some hooey. And I said, well, I know I don't really do it. And she got up and left the room, and her 17-year-old son, who had been sitting there reading a book, came over and said, can I come? I'm going to come with you. I want to see that. I said, well, yeah, but you got to sit through this long lecture and a meditation. I don't care. I want to see that thing where they fall down. So I told him where it was, and so he met me. He sat on the edge of his seat through the entire lecture and just ate it all up. And when it was time to go up there, he said, let's go up there. And I said, I'm not going up there. And he said, oh. He said, if it's real, don't you want to experience it? And if it's fake, don't you want to know? And I thought, out of the mouths of babes. So I got behind him and got in line. And at this point, I had never been within 100 feet of her. And so we go up, and he's the last person. Now I'm waiting, and I'm looking at it from the side, and the audience is here. And she says to him, there couldn't be anything wrong with you, kid, because you're beautiful and radiant and just a vision. And he said, oh, no, I just want a blessing. She said, great. So I saw her touch him, a big smile on his face. She touched him, and he fell to the ground. Then she turns and says, who's next? And as I come on the stage, I'm 15 feet from her. The closer I get, the more her face comes into focus. And by the time I'm 4 feet from her, I go, you're the lady from the dreams. I didn't say it, but I thought it. And she says, I know you. And I said, oh, I know you. And she says, be quiet, you talk too much. And I thought, boy, she sure figured me out real quick. So she touches me on my chest, and I burst into tears. And I have no idea why. I thought, what are you doing? Why are you crying? Why are you crying in front of all these people? And then she draws the Om on my forehead. And I see her hand coming towards me. And as her hand is coming towards me, I say, oh, she's got something in her hand. It's a trick. And I see this bright light in her hand. And I think it's a laser or a flashlight or something or a crystal. But it was nothing. And as she came towards me, the light enveloped me, and I went out of my body and flew around the planet and woke up on the floor. And I had no idea how I got there, but I knew one thing. I was not the same person I had been, and I would never be that person again. And that was the beginning of 10 years with Hilda. She liked to go, one year she said, we gotta go to Europe, kids, we gotta go to Europe. I wanna go to all the cathedrals in Europe and pray for world peace. Would you do that with me? Would you do that with me? Would you commit to that? Would you give some time for world, would you do that? We said, of course, Hilda, anything for you. So we would go to Europe. We would go from place to place. Hilda had a great fondness for Joan of Arc and had a great relationship on the inner plane with Joan of Arc. So we traveled all over France looking for signs of Joan of Arc. We went to the tower where she had been held captive, and we went up the stairs and saw the stone bed that she slept on, that the men tortured her and ripped her clothes and abused her on, and I saw all of that. And then we went. We couldn't really find anything that we could touch that really had Joan's energy in it. And then we got off the train in the wrong place in France, and we were in this town called Rennes, and R-E-I-N. And we were checked into a hotel, and the next train that we needed was not for the next day. So Hilda said, well, why don't you send out some people, you go out, find out what they have in this town, see if there's something we should see while we're here. There's a cathedral here. Well, one of the most beautiful cathedrals in the world is there. So somebody came back and said, oh my God, Hilda, there's this great cathedral, and there's a statue of a horse with Joan of Arc in front of it. And so that was enough. And so we went there. Dead of winter, freezing. We're walking through the cathedral. We go all the way to the back of the cathedral. And there in this little caged in section, there was a life-size statue of Joan of Arc wearing her armor that she wore, wearing these metal boots that she wore that were men's armor, with a staff with a flag on it. That was the very staff that she took across France, that she never once let touch the ground. And there was a little cup with a dead flower in it. And he said, oh, this is terrible. She said, go get a flower from the altar. So we went, took the cup, got some water, got a flower, brought it, Hilda put it there. And it was myself, Al Levy, and Anna Maria Nicholson, and Hilda. And the three of us were standing behind Hilda, and Hilda had her hands on the feet of the statue, and she started crying. She said, oh my God, that must have been so hard for a young girl of 17 to have to go through all of this. And she had to wear these shoes. I'll never complain about my feet again. And as she's standing there doing that, Hilda suddenly was thrown backwards, and we caught her. And the four of us must have looked like a statue of the Pieta, because we just were leaning against, and the statue, the breasts lifted and the eyes opened slightly. And we all looked at each other to see if the other people were having the same experience that I was having. And it was an instant. It could have gone, it seemed like an eternity, but it was only seconds. And then the eyes closed. And Hilda turned and said, we found our Joan. So I came back to New York, had a postcard of it, and a friend of mine did a beautiful drawing of it, and I wrote a beautiful poem about that experience. But it really is, the reason I'm telling you this story is because though Hilda was a real person and a human being, and she lived and she loved to go to the movies. Of course, she couldn't go to the movies because there were 9 people that lived in her house, and as soon as she'd say, oh, I want to go see this movie, They say, oh yeah, let's go to the movies. And they'd all go to the phone and call somebody, who'd call somebody, who'd call somebody. And Hilda would show at the movie theater, there'd be 50 people on the sidewalk trying to touch her feet. And she was like, I just wanted to go to the movies. So she wanted to have some sense of a normal life, you know, because her whole life, every step of her life was towards God. That was it. That was her thing. She wasn't interested in anything else. She was interested in God. And what is God? And what does that mean? Not what this religion tells you or what this religion tells you, because from Hilda's perspective, all religions are the same. It's a map. It can take you from here to the finish line. Doesn't matter. You know, the mountain, at the top of the mountain, and we all start at the bottom of the mountain. You can go around the mountain and take years, and you're meditating, you're practicing, you're doing service and sadhya, and you're doing seva, you're doing all these things, you're trying to do the best you can, you're working on yourself. She gave us so many great tools. People would feel pushed in on by the world because the world's a rough, tough place. And would say, you know, you got to be firm, kids. She called everybody kids. So she taught us this exercise. You take your hand very firmly, you hold it right in front of your face. You breathe in, you deliberately, purposely pull it down and pull it right into your center. And you do it 3 times for all 3 bodies, the mental body, the emotional body, the spiritual body. Whenever you're out of balance, whenever the world is pushing in on you, get quiet. Firmness. Pull that in. It works. Hilda taught Raja Yoga, which is the royal yoga. It encompasses everything else. It encompasses hatha, it encompasses postures, it encompasses karma yoga, where you just really literally give all of your life to service. There's, and of course, bhakti yogis, it's all about devotion. Their love of God, their devotion of God. And when you reach a certain point in that evolution, every single eye, every single face you look into is God. There's nothing but God. God is everywhere, in everything, good, bad, and indifferent. You cannot separate God in this little neat package. Oh, it's all good. God is good. God is good. God is also the goddess Kali, the Black Mother, and she'll come and slash you and make you change your life. You know, I used to say to people who can't see beyond, they can't see around the corner. You can't see around the corner. You have to go to the corner and look and see what's down this way, right? But we don't. We're comfortable here. This is a comfortable view. I like this view. I don't want to upset the apple cart. I don't want to have to do a bunch of work. This is enough for me. And then if you're really dedicated and you're really worth it, Kali comes along and just as you're leaning, trying to see without actually moving. So you're leaning and Kali comes along and kicks you in the butt and you fall. And as you fall, oh, there it is. It's right there. It was right around the corner from you the whole time. Hilda would say, God is nearer than breathing, nearer than hand or foot. I think of all the times that in my life, when I settled on something and I thought, oh, this is it, this is it. You know, the Hindus have a saying, nyati nyati, meaning not this, not this. Oh, is it fame? No. Is it money? No. Maybe it's a new lover? No. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. Hilda could say you can have all those things. But just remember, in the end, they mean nothing. The only thing that's lasting, the only thing that's unchanging, that is ever present, is God. So many people had bad experiences. So many people were raised Catholic or conservative Jewish or Muslim or even conservative Hindus. Young people, I meet a lot of young people and they're like, oh, don't say the name Jesus, I can't hear their name. And some people say, oh God, who can hear? What are you talking about? That's a bunch of hooey. And I just smile. I say, okay, let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about love. Do you love someone? Tell me how you feel when you love someone. Can you find love? Do you have compassion? Hilda taught to love, to treat every single person as though they were yourself. Hilda would say, you know, you come here to this class. Oh, we love you, Hilda. Oh, we love you. Oh, you just give us so much joy and bliss, you know. And then you go out of here and you go home and you yell at the person on the subway. Or, you know, that person took my parking space, you know. So are you willing to lose and be held back from your own evolution? Nobody's going to stop you, you know. If only the masters spoke to each of us. And I'm not sure they don't. Every single one of us has an intuition. Every single one has it's almost always your first thought. You know, can't be that. I don't like that. That's too much work. So let me see what else is up there. It's like the story of the man in India, was being chased by a wild elephant who was taking people and throwing them in the air and injuring them. And so this other man in the tree, who was up in the tree, said, here, come up. He's like, no, God's got it. God's got it. Then the elephant caught up with him and picked him up and threw him against the wall and broke his leg. And he said to the man, why didn't God save me? He said, well, why didn't you listen to him? He offered you a hand, but you wanted to do it your way. We always want to do it our way. And so, how do you find the right way? Do you have to go to India? Do you have to go to the Himalayas? Do you have to go to 100 different teachers and yogis, possible yogis? And then, oh, not that one. Well, he was good, but no, he wanted money. Or, well, I like what he had to say, but he's awfully flirtatious with the female students. It's not necessary. It's great when it happens. It's a great blessing if you're fortunate enough to open your heart and find a great teacher, but it's not necessary. God will be your guru. All you got to do is every single day. First thing I think of when I wake up is, oh, you know what, God? I don't know what your plans are for today, but let me be a part of them. And sure enough, something happens. Somebody needs help, somebody needs something. You know, the other day I was thinking this, I turned the corner by my house, I live in the mountains, turned the corner, and the mailman has backed off the side of the road into a ditch over this huge rock, and he can't get this little vehicle out, he's stuck. So my husband and I got out, and we helped pull it out, and that didn't work. So then I ran up to our house and got some boards, and that wasn't working. And then I thought, what are you, an idiot? Oh, God. This man serves people. He helps people. Everybody loves the mailman, unless you're getting bills, right? But, so I'm thinking, oh God, this guy's this early in the day, it's gonna interfere with his whole day. It'll throw him behind, and somebody's in there. There's a piece of mail in there for somebody who's waiting for that piece of mail. And I just went on and on and on like that. And I said, just steer this way and push the pedal all the way in. And my husband and him looked at me like, what are you, a mechanic? You know? And he said, well, I'll try it. And as soon as you try it, it came right out. I said, thanks God. I didn't tell them because I didn't know the mailman well enough to tell him that. My husband's an atheist. So how do you live with an atheist? I was interviewed for a magazine, an online magazine that my friend Danny Goldberg, who was in the music industry for many years and was one of Hilda's students. And he started a podcast about people who are in the entertainment industry who are also yogis or studying to be yogis. And how do you mix these two things together? How do you bring the world, how do you bring God into your world without turning into the crazy religious nut that lives next door that, you know, the other, which reminds me, this never happened to me before, but I've heard of other people. The other day there was a knock at my door in the middle of the day. I've been there 3 years, nobody's ever knocked on my door. I live in the mountains in the middle of nowhere. I'm going to open the door, and there's this lady and her young daughter who's about 9 or 10 years old. I said, hello, what can I do for you? I'm here to talk to you about the future. And I said, well, I can't tell you how great that is. I think that's just really great. And I'm going to pray tonight, seriously pray, that you reach all the people you want to reach with this good message of yours. But unfortunately, I can't invite you in because my husband is a raging atheist. And I am a lover of God. And she said, I understand. You have a nice day. And she turned around and left. I just think there's a few more things that I wanted to share with you about Hilda. You know, sometimes she'd say things and I'd say, well, that's the silliest thing I ever heard, right? She'd say, what's your name? I'd say, Bobby. She'd know. Your name is tranquility. Your name is equanimity. And she would say to each person, and I would think, well, why would she pick tranquility for me? Well, I know, because I'm half crazy most of the time running around doing things, and my energy's scattered, you know, and I thought, oh, tranquility. And I started to use it as my own mantra. My middle name is Tranquility. I am tranquility. Tranquility is me, you know. I used to laugh at all of those, affirmations. I thought, what a silly thing. That you're going to think by saying these things is, yes, they work. And Hilda found her tools and her wisdom from so many places. But really, it was about what she did in her life, what she showed to other people. You know, for a while, before St. John's, one of her students who had come to America from India had opened a pizza parlor on Broadway at 103rd Street. And he passed away, and he left her the pizza parlor. So she named the pizza parlor Amal's Pizza, A-M-M-A-L. Now, Amal was a woman in Sri Lanka who was an old lady, never been married. I don't think she had any children. And she lived in this village, and her job was to make the rice. And she would make this huge pot of rice for the whole village. Well, one day, stirring the rice, and the air bubble in the rice came up and exploded, and all the hot rice went all over her. And that's a little like melting sugar on you, and then it cools, and then you can't get it off without peeling the skin off, right? So they were all very concerned. They called for people to come, the doctors, and she sat there, never showing any sign of pain. They took it all off, no scarring, nothing. And as soon, the first word she spoke was, build a temple here for the mother. So they built a temple for the mother right there. And Amal lived there. And you could come and see her. You'd have to ask 3 times, Amal, Amal, Amal. And you'd wait for a glance, be like this. That was it. If you weren't paying attention, you missed it. But if you were paying attention and you caught a glimpse of her eyes looking at you, it was done, whatever it was. Somebody's illness, somebody's poverty, someone's problems. And one night at Hilda's class, we had a night celebrating Amal. And people came from all over the place to Hilda's classes anyway. But this particular night, there were, for some reason, all these people who had heard about Amal through Hilda's lectures and talks, and they all had Amal stories. Well, we were in the desert, driving across the desert, and my foolish husband forgot to fill up the gas tank, and we ran out of gas in the middle of the desert. There was no gas station anywhere. And she said, and my husband's like cursing, and I'm thinking, be quiet. And I sat there and I said, Alma, help us, Alma. She said her husband started the car and drove out of the desert. They all had stories like that, you know. Alma was particularly good with parking spaces because we all lived in the city where we could never find a parking space. So Hilda would call me and say, why don't you come up to the house? I said, Hilda, it's no parking up there. It's just ask Alma, you know. And I'd get up there and I'd be driving, and no parking space anywhere, I'm driving around, and then I'd go, Alma, turn the corner, there's parking space. So she was particularly good with parking spaces. So Alma was also, you know, for Hilda, the Divine Mother. Hilda, you know, certainly loved she writes in one of her books, and she did 7 books, and you can, and also we have a website where you can see all of Hilda's work, and all of her classes and lectures are all been recorded and preserved, and you can download them as MPEG-3s, and they're only $3 each, and you can listen to them and share them with your friends. All of her classes were recorded on cassette tapes, and then the next week, the previous class would be available, and so people would buy them and send them out over the world. You know, Hilda had 3 telephones in her house. She had to. So many people were calling her. Oh, Hilda, this is going on with my life, and I don't know what to do. And Hilda would say, and she would listen. She said, yes, dear, I understand. But then she'd say, I don't give advice. Don't come to me for advice. Of course, then she'd tell you everything you needed to know, right? A woman called from Connecticut. Her husband called. Said, someone gave me your number. It's just the last possible hope. My wife has developed an incredible allergy to everything. I've built a small, separate house for her that's just 1 room, and covered everything in aluminum foil or something to try to keep it sterile. She has no life. You know, she can't go anywhere. Can you help her? And Hilda said, can you take her a phone? She said, well, yes. She took the woman the phone. Hilda talked to the woman on the phone for a short time, said goodbye. The next day, Hilda said, I'm going in my room. Please don't knock on the door. I'm fine. I don't need anything. I'll come out when I come out. She went in her room, and she stayed in her room for several days. At one point, she came out to use the bathroom, and someone in her house saw her, and she had welts and rashes all over her. And then she went back into her room. She came out of the room. The next day, it was all gone. The phone rang. The husband said, my wife is healed. She has nothing now. The first time I saw Hilda, when I went to her house and had my first visit with her, I was there until 10 o'clock at night. So high, didn't know how high I was. I went home, the phone rang. And it was friends saying, oh, we're all gonna go to the disco roller rink. And I had been a roller skater too. So, oh yeah, I'd love to come roller skating. So I went roller skating, and I'm flying around the rink, and I've taken many a tumble. I knew how to fall without hurting myself. You know, you just pull everything in and roll, you know. When you put your arms out, that's when you break arms and things. Well, I'm flying, and I went flying, and I fell and broke my arm. So I go to the emergency room, they put a cast on it, I go home. The phone rings the next morning, it's Hilda. Oh, kid, didn't we have a nice visit yesterday? Oh, that was just so lovely, and how are you? I said, well, Hilda, I have a broken heart, I have a cast, I have a broken wrist. How in the world did you get a broken wrist? I just saw you 10 hours ago. I said, well, after I got home, somebody invited me to a roller disco. A roller disco? That's like you spent 10 hours in a temple and then you went into this other vibe. It just flashed. She said, no problem. You know, she said, the class is on Thursday. Don't come and sit through the whole class. Just come to the end, to the healing thing, and we'll all for you, and you'll be fine. So, of course, I went and sat in the back through the whole class. And halfway through, she said, I know you're back there. I told you not to come, but you're back there. And then when it was time for the healing, she called me up and she said to everybody, look what this dub did. She called people dubs, which is, I guess, in English, an old English word for an idiot. So look what this dub did. Show them your hands. I show them again. Tell them what happened. I tell them what happens. She says, okay, kids, everybody get quiet. Come on. Everybody started owning. And Hilda reached over and took a hold of my hand. And I looked out over the audience. And you know when you're driving on a hot road and you see the waves of heat? I could see it all over the people's heads. I could see this energy. And Hilda said, now look away. And so I looked away. And then she took care. And she said, don't go home. If anyone says, what happened to your hand? You say, oh, it's my new bracelet. Isn't it beautiful? Don't say, I have a broken hand. Don't affirm the negative. This is the way God works. God is in you. God works through you. Every word we say, everything we say to other people, everything we say to ourselves, it comes to manifest because we are creating it, because God is in us and cannot get out of us, because where would God go except into more God? So the next day after that, I woke up and the cast was so loose I could almost slip my hand out of it. I thought, oh, this isn't good. So I went to back to the emergency room. I only lived a block from the hospital. And I said, oh, and they said, oh, probably was swollen. And so they're going to cut it off and take another x-ray. Fine. They cut it off. They said, don't move. Keep your hand very still. The nurse will be in any minute. As soon as the nurse left the room, I started moving my hand. I hear a voice that said to me, you're made in the image and likeness of God. God is perfect. You are perfect. You have a perfect hand, two perfect hands, perfect hand. See the light going through my hand. The nurse comes in, she goes, could you come in here? And I go into the room, and they've got 2 sets of x-rays. They have the x-rays from the emergency room visit when they put the cast on, and they have the new x-rays that they just did. And they said, we're really, really sorry. I think we made a terrible mistake. I think we got the night you went into the hospital, you know, these are the new x-rays, and they show a perfect hand that's never been broken. And these x-rays are the ones from the emergency room, but it was busy that night, and so we think they got mixed up with somebody else's hand. And I said, well, that's a really good theory. So the only problem is that I broke this hand before in 6 places. And if you look at the old x-rays, which you say aren't mine, what do they show? And the nurse says, well, they show new break, and then they show scar tissue from an old break. And this one, this is a hand that's never been broken. So I said, thank you. And I started to talk. They said, okay, we're busy, bye. So I left, I went home, I called Hilda. I said, oh, Hilda, it's a miracle. And she said, oh, you kids. Miracle. A miracle is just reality revealing itself to you. Now, would you do me a favor and go over to Mrs. So-and-so's house, and she doesn't have any groceries, would you? Oh, yes, of course, but didn't you hear me? Yes, I heard you, and be thankful and give thanks, and now go do this errand for me. So, you know, that for years and years after that, whenever life was difficult, whenever life was trying, whenever I felt that I was failing, whenever I had a doubt that God is real, I would look at my hand and I say, this is God's hand. And often, you know, when I would talk to people and who are friends or somebody was stressed out, I just touch them and talk to them. I don't tell them the story. They don't need to know the story. But, you know, I think if you're in alignment with God, God will work through you. If you give thanks and you acknowledge that, that's all you have to do. But to not give thanks, to not acknowledge it, we cut ourselves off from our own evolution. You can sit through 1,000,000 yoga classes. You can see 1,000 yogis. You can read 1,000,000 books. But if you're not in alignment with yourself and your alignment with God, that's all fine, it's all practice, it becomes intellectual. But if you really, really want to see God in action, make God an everyday part of what you think, how you think. You know, Yogi Ram Sarat Kumar was a great yogi in India who I met, who was a friend of Hilda's, and I saw him in India. He said, we all went halfway around the world to see him and then sat in the room with him, and he wouldn't talk. He'd just look at us and had imaginary mala beads in his hand, and his mouth is constantly chanting, but no sound comes out of it. And he's looking at you, and he's looking all around you, and he's really looking at you. He's looking at your past and your present and your future. He's looking at all of you because that's who he was. He was that. That's who he was. And he said, this beggar can tell you nothing. We all looked disappointed. And he said, this beggar can only tell you what his teacher told him. It makes no difference what name you use to call the Father. You can call the Father Jesus, Mary, Divine Mother, Holy of Holies. You can make up your own name for the Father. It's intention. If your intention is pure, if your intention is in alignment, God hears you. How could he not? He doesn't even need to speak it. You think it, it's there. Which brought us to Hilda teaching us about how to control the mind. The mind doesn't care what it thinks about. It'll think about anything you give it to think about. So if I'm going to sit and think, oh, it happened, I didn't get that job, and oh, they don't like me, I went to that party and they all laughed at me, and oh, and you just, you know, Hilda said she went through that, and when she went through that in her life, the master said to her, oh, poor little itsy bitsy Hilda. So she said, oh, that's my mantra. So whenever she would feel like she was falling into those pits of despair, she would say, oh, poor little itsy bitsy me. And then she'd laugh and say, oh, isn't that ridiculous? That's crazy, kid. You know, and that's how she got through things. These are little things. These are simple things. These are not big things, you know. The big things are pretty big, you know. I can't levitate. You know, Hilda literally levitated off the ground into the air 3 times in her life. Once it happened in public, and she was holding on to the building, and her feet were 6 inches off the ground, and she didn't want anybody, she was thinking someone's going to see this, and this is going to turn into a riot. People are going to go crazy, and God, why are you doing this? But she hadn't learned how to ground herself, how to put herself into alignment, how to take that energy and that Shakti and cap it, hold it, stand it. Can you stand it? Everybody wants to be enlightened. Everybody wants to find their way to that place of, oh, you know, I'm enlightened now, I'm a yogi. But they don't want to do the work, or they want to give up those comforts. You know, you can go around the mountain, life after life after life after life to get to the top. Sometimes it takes longer because you get up a bit and you think, oh, that was really hard just to get here. I think I'll stay here for a while. So you hang out, and this is good enough. It's good enough. I don't have to deal with the fact that I gossip, or that I say bad things about people, or I see the worst in others. I'm spiritual. I believe I've found God. I don't have to work on me at all. And so you hang out there. And then one day, grace comes, which is not something we can ask for. It's not something you earn. It's a gift. And God looks down and says, okay. And next thing you know, you're like, oh, well, that wasn't as hard as I thought it was. That's a little easier. And now things are going a little smoother. And I can add that to my collection of tools that I use. Anyway, I want to, before we go, I want to play Hilda for you and do a little meditation that she will lead us in. Can you do that? I don't think there's anything, well, let's see. Before you play that, I just want to read a poem that Hilda wrote. It's a short poem. Hilda wrote this. I behold within God's hand my pure and reborn soul. Cleansed by his grace am I, like freshly fallen snow. This breath is sweet and comforts me in moments of my birth. For every step I take will be his own upon the earth. I will wander through the heavens and soar in every sky, melting in your sea of love, you, my God, and I. And as I see this world anew, my heart is filled with bliss. There is no greater treasure, Lord, for me to find than this. Lay down my soul within your hand. My soul is free as wind and sea. The purest flower has grown. Okay. So let's just get quiet for a minute and watch your breath. Take a deep breath in and a deep breath out. Take the word love. Think of love, someone you love that's easy to love. And breathe in love.
Breathe into your throat. Breathe out slowly, as if your throat has a nose. Breathe into the center where Nityananda starts. Breathe out. Now without hands, without moving, concentrate with deep concentration. Breathe up your right nostril. And down your left. Watch the breath go down and out. Breathe up the left nostril, or watch it come up with your mind's eye. And down your right. Breathe into your third eye, which is between your eyebrows. Breathe into your forehead. And breathe out. Now breathe normally and pull gently, everything gentle behind the eyes that you're pulling into a realm behind. And from that realm, look into your forehead. See the great expanse within. You feel no ears, no scalp. You feel as you have no chin. You don't know where your chin ends. Eyes relaxing. Don't fear. As the body gets light and easy and clear, don't fear. Don't fear the loss of consciousness. Back straight, please. Back straight, please. Now breathe into the top of your head, and just back in the center as if it has a home. And breathe out. Breathe in. Come a little higher now. And you use your imagination, or as Sai Baba says, visualization. Feel in your imagination that your legs are part of the floor, the atoms of the floor and the atoms of your feet or your legs, you are the same. They're part of the chair, part of the floor. Just feel as if there's light to the left of you in your imagination. Think as far as you can, and there's only light to the left of you. No person. It's just you, you and God, you and space. And think to the right of you with your mind's eye, you as far as you can think. There's only light, space, you and God. Think in back of you, far as you can think. Now think about you, way up as far as you can think. Don't get nervous. Now in front of you, as far as you can think, you're sitting in the great space of God. Now mentally look below and as if you're sitting way up in the sky. Far below you is the earth. You're free. Now in this state of consciousness, walk into the substance of life of God. Golden substance. Walk into it and feel it come round you in your imagination. Become one with it. No problems in this space. There's no ego in this space. No pride. No greed. You're part of everything. Feel as if you can stand up there and you're as big as the universe in all its glory. Let this peace come over you. Let this quietness come over you. Take the word peace into your consciousness. Shanti, peace, and think upon that peace. And see what it means to you. See if you can become part of the words, and the words become a reality inside of you. Peace. Dive deep within and find that space. From that space, let it erase all of emotional chaos. Take atom of you. I shall say it for you. May your atoms rearrange themselves this moment. If you be ill, let your atoms rearrange themselves. Let your molecules rearrange themselves into the kind of vibratory rate that God intends. Mentally rearrange yourself. Come on. You can do it. You got a mind. You got a will. You got a heart. Peace, what does peace mean to you? How does peace become part of you? It has no fear, no worry, no care. But you're sure you're part of this great big plan. Relax this moment and let God take hold and rearrange your life. I'm going to fill this cathedral with the light of God. Let the heavens open fast. Flow down each one of you and touch you this night. Rise with the tones of the Om. Rise up. Become light. Become carefree. These sounds rearrange your atoms. Feel as if all your atoms are rearranging. If you're ill, may they rearrange and get well. Get your life, let it be straightened out this moment. Your mind becomes free and happy. Freedom and life. Let the glory of God be yours. Narayana, 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 Om Satya Narayana, 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 Om Narayana, Narayana, Om Satya Narayana, Narayana, Om Satya Narayana. problems in the light here. Mentally, throw your problems, don't throw them at me. I'm going to hold my hand away, right over my knee. Throw your problems in the light, quick, before it burns out. Throw your problems there. Throw away. Go out free and light and airy, huh? Free and light and airy. Come on. As free as the wind, go out. Okay. Oh,
Thank you so much for coming. I hope that I was able to bring you just even a taste of what Hilda was like. And I will tell you that, I can tell you that I know a numerous amount of people who heard about Hilda, never met Hilda, and now Hilda comes to them in dreams, and they have relationships with Hilda. Someone called me recently and said, you know, I thought that that was silly that, you know, once a person's gone, they're gone. But Hilda comes to me in dreams, or in the middle of the day, I'll think of her, and I've never heard her voice. They've never heard her tapes. They've only read her books or heard about her. So I'll hear this voice, this charming voice with a slight English lilt to it. She'll give me directions. And I say, that's Hilda. So thank you so much. Be careful traveling, going home.
Thank you.